Good afternoon. I am Joyce Hunter, the Executive Director of the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology, or ICIT as we are commonly known. The Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology is the nation's leading cybersecurity think tank, providing objective, nonpartisan research, advisory, and education to legislative, commercial, and public sector cybersecurity stakeholders. ICIT's programs and initiatives support cybersecurity practitioners in all 16 critical infrastructure sectors defined by the Department of Homeland Security and can be leveraged by other community members impacted by digital adversaries, including small and medium business owners, academia, and other industries impacted by digital threats. Our topic for today is the modern security battlefield, what 2020 taught us about gaps in vulnerability management, and we would like to thank Skybox for sponsoring this event. I'm going to turn this over to our moderator, Janine Mahone, who will introduce you to your panel for this session. Janine's career spans decades in the cybersecurity software industry, where she has enabled hundreds of companies across all verticals as a product manager, marketer, trainer, and consultant. As a senior manager at Skybox, she is a passionate advocate for redefining the way companies view, manage, and mitigate vulnerabilities and drives business and marketing strategy for the company's VTM product portfolio. Welcome, Janine, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Joyce. Thanks for that welcome. And also thanks to ICIT for hosting this fantastic event. I'm really excited to be moderating this event with panelists who are well known in the industry. And of course, they're no strangers to events like these being hosted by ICIT. So thought we'd change it up a little bit. And instead of just reading bios, I'd love to have each of our panelists introduce themselves and tell the audience what they would like the audience to know about them. So why don't we start off with Renee? Would you mind going ahead, Renee?
Oh, Janine, thank you so much. And good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Janine, for Skybox for their sponsorship of this great conference, and very much appreciated. So I'm Renee Wynn. I'm the former Chief Information Officer for NASA, where I delivered global and off the globe IT services to NASA and led the effort with an amazing team to overhaul the cyber posture of NASA as well. So look forward to being part of this panel.
Thanks, Renee. And over to you, John.
Hi, I'm John Agnello. I'm a colonel in the Army. I'm currently the Chief of Development for U.S. Cyber Command. I'm actually just about to transition out of that job to go down to Georgia to be the Chief of Doctrine for the Army for cyber. Looking forward to this. You know, I've been doing this for quite a while, and really great panelists that are on here, and looking forward to the discussion.
Amazing. Yes, thank you. Welcome. And Steve, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Thanks, Janine. My name is Steve Priskowski, and I work over in CISA doing security test and evaluation for all of the tools and defenses that we deploy for our operators to protect the .gov.
Absolutely great. So welcome, panelists. So to set the tone for the audience, no doubt you have read the agenda for this event, and so that's why you're here. But to set the tone, as we highlighted in our agenda, I think you'll agree that 2020 was one of the most difficult years, not just socially and economically, but also digitally. We saw organizations in both the private and public sector rally to support remote work, protect corporate data wherever it was located. And, you know, we titled this session, The Modern Security Battlefield, for a reason. Here at Skybox, our research team identified that in 2020, compared to 2019, there were almost 20,000 new vulnerabilities that were discovered. And we also saw a double-digit increase in the number of OT and IIoT vulnerabilities. And as we expected, we also saw that threat actors responded, right? They exploited a number of these vulnerabilities. We saw a triple-digit increase in the number of ransomware samples as well as Trojans. So when we look at the overall threat landscape, we look at the pictures that we have seen from our own research, we've come to the conclusion that this, as well as our security teams have been responding, we're realizing that this volumetric method of managing vulnerabilities just really isn't always successful, right? We saw a number of very high profile breaches in 2020. So given that backdrop, I'd love to speak with our panel about these gaps that they may have seen in vulnerability management, especially uncovered from this unprecedented COVID pandemic that we've all had to experience. And also some of the lessons that security teams have learned over the past year or so. And of course, we want to leave our audience with some key takeaways of the steps that are needed going forward in the second half of the year to really manage the volume of vulnerabilities and secure systems in what we're now seeing as this new normal. So first question for the panelists. We saw these teams, security teams, really rallying, as I mentioned before, addressing new and existing vulnerabilities, and at the same time, enabling a distributed workforce. So as you looked at this across the board, what digital transformation initiatives did you see these teams prioritizing, and maybe ones that were even considered to be more effective in terms of protecting and securing systems? So anyone wants to start? That's great.
So team, I'll go ahead and start and you can fill in after that. So one of the things that we saw in preparing for and during the pandemic was the ability to take some of the tools that were very, very secure, but didn't permit external collaboration. So now that we've gone to this virtual world, the ability to hold a secure call, prepare documents securely together, share documents securely. There were definitely a lot of different pockets going on in terms of making that happen within the federal government, but enterprises themselves, entire agencies lacked an enterprise approach, or many of them did. And so one of the things that I know that we did at NASA is that we had just deployed about a year before Office 365, and we were continuing to deploy the other elements of Office 365. So we quickly got teams out there for use and added the ability to collaborate externally and the ability to phone in so that everybody didn't have to be on the computer in order to participate. So those were two ways that we advanced rather rapidly in our capabilities to do our business. And when we do that, it also changes your cybersecurity profile. You now have personal devices or other federal agency devices that may have different requirements for complying with federal standards. And so now you're having to protect your network and your enterprise a little bit differently with the influx of personal devices or the allowance of devices that are owned and managed by other clients, including other federal agencies. And so it was a great thing to do, but it also changed your risk profile, and you had to be prepared to make amends and mitigations associated with that. And I'll turn it over to my other panelists to build off of that.
And I would add to that, Renee, like new technologies that have been coming out to allow collaboration, but then also remote access. So speeding up timelines for other things that were to be delivered so that it's easier for the end users to access those tools either remotely, so that way then they can do all their work as they need to in the new postures. But then at the same time, how do we make sure that those are secure, getting spun up on the technologies and smart on them? That way then we can effectively integrate them into the domains and maintain our same security postures has been interesting, to say the least.
The thing about that is, working at U.S. Cyber Command and, our sister organization, NSA, there's not much stuff you can do from home. Let's put it that way. So when Cybercom and NSA went to a distributed, just straight distributed system, and they pushed out, just like Renee was saying, they pushed out Microsoft Teams. We actually started working telework agreements for people that have never teleworked before. I mean, it was amazing to see how the agency and the command completely evolved, because we actually went out and they gave us laptops. Crazy idea. Give your employees laptops to bring home. And then and used Microsoft Teams for meetings. And the funny thing is that the organizations went to that and we could do it remotely. However, for the people that were actually still in the office, connecting those devices so you're on the same domain and actually staying in those meetings was very, very hard. And a lot of times, if you were in the office, you would have to dial in via phone to those meetings because people that are teleworking from home could use Microsoft Teams. Well, at the office, you can't use Microsoft Teams because they don't want microphones open when you're inside the agency, obviously. So there was definitely a steep learning curve across the board. But I will say definitely for the command, and I mean, I'm not going to speak for NSA, but definitely between the command and NSA, I think they definitely moved quickly to allow people to do that. And it seemed to work well so far, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey, Janine, can I add a little bit of color to this?
Sure.
Because the panelists have offered, all of us have offered sort of some of the struggles that were initially felt and, some of the risks in range of severity that the agencies felt. But I also want to end on this question in terms of that the federal government still delivered on its mission. For NASA alone, just quite simply, although it's not quite simply, there were 3 historic launches in 2020 that went off without a hitch. So as we talk about the challenges, the mission was still delivered with heroic efforts in the background by the IT specialists, by the leaders of these agencies, and all of that. And the 3 historic launches, just so people are like, which ones were they? Was the first ever commercial launch, crew launch from the United States soil, where SpaceX provides a ride, quite a thrilling ride, I might add, to International Space Station. And so that was a bit of an up and back. And then the second one in the summertime or fall timeframe was an up and stay, because Victor Glover is still up there right now. And then in between that, we launched and landed the Perseverance rover on Mars successfully. So I want to underscore that as we talk about the challenges, those are intended to be educational, but I also want to remind that the United States government stepped forward and really provided some amazing services to our constituents.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a good response there, Renee, because I think what we're seeing in overall is that business enablement continued, right? Just as you mentioned, the collaborative approach, all the tools that were used for collaboration that were spun up immediately. And, in John's case, having physical devices that were sent into areas that we would normally not have had to have that protection, right? So what you saw was the spin up of a very great effort to balance between business enablement and, of course, securing the environment, which is it's fantastic to see that. So, of course, as we're looking back at 2020, we're going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, and definitely the efforts from the security teams and enabling businesses was one of the great efforts there. So, anything else to add on that particular topic, panel?
I would say it's even added to moving the government, I'll say the .gov forward in the digital transformation to how do we operate in the new paradigm. More things can be done remote. We're not all necessarily correlated in the NCR anymore. We can be distributed across the CONUS.
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
Moving it forward.
Yeah. And as you each worked with your security teams, one of the things that we saw with 2020 was the fact that the threat actors have become more sophisticated. And I think that's becoming almost a buzzword now, right? So you saw this level of sophistication increase. We're seeing ransomware as a service, for example. Different organizations are literally becoming very, very strongly for profit, and they're collaborating just like traditional businesses are. So how did you see security teams innovating, if any, in terms of being able to address this new approach, this new adversarial approach, and this sophistication?
I would say I can start that one, Renee. Janine. Sorry, Renee. I know we at CISA have started a new campaign and trying to do campaigns monthly to put out. This month we're doing a campaign on ransomware to raise awareness of this is what we're seeing, this is how to educate the public on it, and not just the public as the general population, but the different like K-12 and the different private public partnerships that we have. How do we educate them? How do we best protect our networks while protecting them and becoming more collaborative instead of being in silos before? And just information sharing is probably the biggest thing that with the transformation has been coming out of it.
Yeah.
Tell off of that. So I think one of the biggest things across the board in the intelligence community is collaboration and information sharing. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things. And I think in Cyber Command, we definitely have, we started a long time ago, but I think that we've definitely picked our game up when it comes to information sharing across the command, across our subordinate organizations, and then to our sister agency, and then everyone throughout the intelligence community. At the same time, one of the things that we've been doing in Cyber Command is collaboration with industry and academia. I think that's a huge game, especially Ginny, and I know within your company, data sharing and everything regarding data, it's huge, and data is king. So the more information that you have, and the more that you can parse, sort, use that data, the better your organization is going to be secure-wise. And then, when you move from that defense to that offensive side, it's the same thing. I think that we've worked very well with industry and academia when we're trying to do information sharing and intelligence sharing and vulnerability research, all of that. I think that's really is the key across the board, is sharing information at large.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, because CISA, you hear there, Steve, you mentioned the directives that CISA is putting out, right? And the education that you're doing on a monthly basis. And of course, John, the collaboration that you're seeing with the community at large, right? And within the vendor community, obviously, we have levels of collaboration. Many of the vendors are working hard to integrate with each other, to establish some common platform, if you will, to be able to share that information, to serve up that data as quickly as possible, so that the result is that security teams have the ability to respond, as well as to detect those vulnerabilities prior to them being exploited. And of course, forcing the function of looking specifically for those assets that are exposed to be able to remediate them as quickly as possible. But in the future, since we're looking backwards and forwards as well, do you see any gaps that currently exist that could probably be patched in terms of the extension of collaboration? And by that, I mean, I know we know about common groups like FBI's InfraGard and how, that collaboration happens, but do you see any extension of either what you're doing today or anything that could be addressed with the community at large?
Yeah, there's actually several things going on in the background, and I'm sure that my fellow panelists can really add some more to this one. So what really got illuminated in the pandemic is the need to share for information, which we just talked about. But what got accelerated was its absolute importance to get the information into the right people's hands very, very quickly, and to collaborate over that information. When we reflect more officially on the SolarWinds, there was an opportunity, and there were folks that saw some early signals long before this hit the media. And we all have to learn how to, what is in an early signal, what is relevant and what is just interesting. And I think the lessons from SolarWind will help all of us understand better what's interesting versus relevant or important, right? And then start to take action on early signals, so that you don't end up with a widespread issue in enterprises or amongst several agencies, like the enterprise of the government. So that information sharing becomes really critical. It's again a reminder that we've got to share it and go forward and try to prevent the SolarWinds. And the SolarWinds has an element of supply chain risk associated with it. And some federal agencies are going to need to put a little speed in their marching. In fact, I might call it running now, in order to really tune their supply chain processes, whether they're looking at parts integrity or whether there are cyber threats within the hardware and software. Those things have to be merged, and they have to start moving at the pace of business. So collaboration, understand early signals, like what's important versus what's interesting. And then finally, we've got to start running in the federal government when it comes to managing our supply chain risk.
You know, it's about indications of compromise, I think is what Renee's talking about. That's really, it's, you know, when you're looking at indications of compromise, what's important? I'll give a little bit of an analogy here that was kind of an antidote that I remember when I was stationed out in Germany. You know, I was working with the organization that runs the networks out there, and I was talking to the leader of the organization, and I said, you know, you got to start looking at understanding there definitely could be adversaries in your network. There definitely is. We know that there's adversaries in your network. We know they're doing things. The interesting thing was, he says, look at me, and he goes, John, my people, this is probably 6, 7, 8 years ago or so, but you know, he goes, my people are computer guys. They're IT guys. It's a hardware issue or it's a software issue. There's nothing else. And it's funny because, you know, for the longest time, there is a lot of people that are in our organizations, in our industry, that looked at it that way 100%. There's obviously a hardware issue. There's obviously a software issue. That's it. They don't think about that there's adversaries in your network that are extremely sophisticated, that are trying to do stuff to you. I think that we've moved forward with that. I think, like Renee is saying, we definitely aren't moving fast enough. You never can catch up to them. That's really what comes down to. You know, it goes to that hunt forward, you know, moving forward to find the adversary as they get more sophisticated. How can you defend your network quicker? How can you, you know, flush them out of your network quicker? You know, never can move fast enough, really.
Yeah, and I think we share that philosophy as well from a security vendor perspective, right? It's about zeroing on really what matters, identifying those vulnerabilities that you can patch immediately that will have the largest impact in terms of how you secure your systems, right? And I think that again is overall simplifying it down to the degree, right? I think that those are great anecdotes that you just shared there, John. So anything else, by the way, John, or sorry, Stephen or Renee, you wanted to add to that? No? Okay, so we're about halfway through. I just wanted to, you know, also say that to the audience, if you have questions, you could put those in the chat. We've got a team of fine folks back there looking at your questions, and they'll pipe those through to us so that we can address them to the panelists. That way you can get as involved and get your questions and comments answered as part of this interactive discussion as well. All right, so I have a few more questions here because you mentioned a few security tools, and you know, what we're seeing in the industry is that vendors are coming together, as we mentioned before, and collaborating, but not always, right? So companies are spending more money, they're beefing up their security stacks, but are you seeing these vendors like really play well together, you know, providing that integration that will provide that visibility that you mentioned earlier, so they can kind of hone in and fix what needs to be fixed immediately?
Let me take that one to start with. So one of the beautiful things that Cyber Command has is Cyber Command has an organization called Dreamport. Dreamport is an unclassified environment that's here in Maryland that allows, there's a lot of things you can and can't say about it. Obviously, it's not an incubator, but they do incubator stuff. It's not an unclassed cybercom facility. It's a nonprofit organization that works with Cyber Command. But one of the things that this organization does is it allows industry and academia to come in and really kind of pitch their ideas, pitch their technologies. And at this place, we have the ability to do rapid prototyping events and find something that could, you know, win this rapid prototyping event, say, you know, figure a way to hack the building or something. And whoever wins it, we can put them directly on contract. We have the ability to put them directly on contract and start using their technology. It's a way to bring industry into Cyber Command quite quickly. One of the beautiful things we get to do with that is, you know, I sat on, we had an industry day there once for data science technologies. We brought in, I think, 64 companies, and they had, so Cyber Command has things called the technical challenge problems. Basically, here's the big problems we want industry to solve for us. Figure out how you can do. And what they did was they brought in 64 different companies, and they just had all their different technologies that they find a way to address one of the 123 technical challenge problems we have.
Okay.
And allows them to show it to us, and they just pitch their ideas to us constantly. My chief data scientist, I sat there for 7 hours and went, very, very much like the Shark Tank kind of day. And we really got to see some really interesting technologies, and we're able to implement a few of them right on the spot to help secure our organizations and help secure our environment, and also better technologies to visualize the infrastructure, whatever it may be. So I think that's a great innovation that we have the ability to work very closely with industry that way.
Right.
I think most of the government is going the same way with that, and I'll turn it over to the rest for anything to add to that.
Okay. I know, Stephen, you had some comments. I think we've met before. We talked about red teaming and so on. Yeah.
It's a lot of things that we do is like we'll do go out, look out what's out in industry, and then start doing similar to what John had mentioned. Like we call them bake-offs. Looking at what we have the problem, this is what we're trying to solve, and see how the tools solve those problems, and then what type of security implementation or implication that would cause into our environment. So what would we need to do to secure that? How secure is that piece of software or appliance or device? And then work to get it integrated into our networks to be able to be used by our operators.
Okay.
I think I have the ending bottom line on this one based on the answers of my fellow panelists. Is one of the things I want to remind the audience, any company doing business, I know I did, I'm sure Stephen and John and Janine, I know, working with you the last couple of days, getting ready for this, you need to enter working with the federal government in a collaborative mindset. It's in cybersecurity, we are making more pie on a regular basis, right? We are not fighting for the pie, but our adversaries are getting more sophisticated. So we need to make more pie to get to this sophistication and help everybody be successful. So come in with an open mindset and definitely to collaborate. I've pulled in a few contractors myself to say, no, I'm not a referee. This has to work. Go have dinner, right? And don't come back to me if you can't play together very well. The second thing is a reminder for all of us. If you are doing business with the United States government, from the Postal Service to the Historic Preservation Society, to the Hill, to the White House, to NASA, something near and dear to my heart, you are always working at the edge of national security. Even if you're not with defense or the intel community, you are working at the edge of national security because we all work together in some capacity and our networks can contaminate each other. And I think I have seen in these big incidents that make the newspaper, what I see a lot of times is a little bit of arrogance. Like, I'm happy to sell to the government and take public money, but they don't realize that when you make that decision, you are making a handshake that you will uphold your responsibilities and protect the Constitution, which is considered national security. So I just want to remind folks, it's a great privilege and it's an honor to be in the federal government. And I think it's a great privilege and an honor to serve their missions for our success. So just keep in mind that IT is all interconnected. So if you pollute one little puddle of water, you're going to pollute a lot more.
So I want to jump on for one more second after what Renee just said there. Made me think about the big thing that we were working for the last, let's say, 5 months ago, there was the election. So securing the election is a big deal. It was the number one priority for U.S. Cyber Command. A lot of number one priorities for a lot of organizations. The interesting thing with that is who actually has the task to secure the elections. So here's the funny part. So every state has their own election. Every state secretary of state is technically the one to manage that. Well, those secretary of states are for the state, Then you have Homeland Security that also is supposed to defend the homeland. Then you have Cyber Command that's supposed to defend the military, but also defend the government. So I remember sitting in meetings with, secretaries, CIOs of states, along with DHS personnel, along with Cyber Command personnel, all in the same time. We're all trying to figure out what's the best way and how do we collaborate so every voting machine is secure, the ballots themselves are secure, the transportation of the ballots, the transfer of the data, all of that together. How do you secure it from end to end and then end up in a box that sits in the Senate? There's a long process associated with that, but I'll tell you what, that's collaboration to the T when it comes to security.
Yeah. Right.
And I'd say, even to add to that, I think all of the comments that we've had so far, it's all information sharing, all collaboration. It's how do we do that better than what we do today? Because we can only get better. Look at yesterday as the past, and how do we move from there?
Yeah, and those are really, really good comments. Go ahead, John.
Yesterday, sorry. The old saying of your only easy day was yesterday.
Yeah. So this is some kind of a battlefield we're fighting right now, and you're absolutely right. It takes an army, right? It takes an army of the entire community. It takes an army of end users being very security aware. It takes the collaboration between vendors outside of the private or public sector, private and public sector working together. So those are fantastic comments. So I have two big questions for you. Again, we've been looking back. I want to see, what your thoughts are looking forward. So, you've seen so many things happen over the past 12 and now 16 months. We're into 2021. So what are your key predictions? Do you foresee, the innovations happening as you can see in your agencies that you're working within right now? What are your key predictions for the second half of 2021 in terms of any innovations, any security gotchas, any big moments or items that you think the audience would be interested in hearing about? Who's going to go first? That was a tough question.
So I'm not in the federal government, so I'll go ahead and speak up, right? And then we'll Stephen and John can fix it going, you've got to be kidding me, right? Which would be far more interesting to some of our listening folks, right? To have a little bit of attention here. So I see a couple of things on the horizon. There is always going to be something from supply chain risk that we're going to bring into the way the government does business. And so that's already started. I think you will begin to see secure AI used where you take a look at the biases that are inherent in the artificial intelligence, because the human has great capabilities, but if you get too much data thrown at you, you will become ineffective. And so artificial intelligence will allow agencies, security operations centers, network operations centers, vulnerability programs to really take the information that they're reading off of the network and pull that together with intel information, kind of scrub so it's not classified. And that will start to get put together to benefit and improve cybersecurity posture, which will allow us to continue to expand and advance in our capabilities to protect. So I see two things: supply chain risk becoming, coming to the forefront, which we're seeing it with some audits and things. And the other thing is really AI that is unbiased and secure to use to help us be more effective at our jobs, or your jobs, not mine.
I think hit the nail directly on the head. I think with definitely AI, we work very closely with the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center under under DoD CIO. So work very closely with them, and AI is definitely the way we're going across the board, and how you can implement that for everything. Supply chain risk management is going to be there. It's going to continue to get worse. It's going to continue to get more attention, I guess is a better way to put it. The other thing I'd put in there, and I think where we are behind the power curve against all the other organizations in the government, is cloud architecture, cloud infrastructure. You know, the government writ large has put that all government organizations are going to go to a cloud infrastructure kind of thing. But you know, DoD being the big elephant in the room, it's kind of the hardest thing to move the entire department to a cloud infrastructure. So we've been doing a lot to try and figure out how do you employ cloud and everything. And the other thing, how do you secure that cloud at different levels of classification? That's really one of the biggest things. Is, you know, obviously we work at the unclassified, the secret, and the top secret levels. So, you know, how do you secure that cloud? Because you're transferring risk. Obviously, you're transferring risk to Amazon. You're transferring risk to some other organization that's going to manage it for you. And then, you know, you have to have some type of agreement with those organizations to be the ones that are actually securing it. And I'll say there definitely is a lot of hesitation. I think that we're finally getting on board with it. I think we're moving slower than we need to be. But I definitely think over the next year, that's probably going to be one of the biggest pushes we're doing, is trying to figure out the best way to implement cloud infrastructure securely. And then also, obviously, as like Renee said, I think IA is the biggest, you know, thing that we're going to go with is IA or AI.
Yeah. No problem. Actually, I just wanted to tap into what you just said, because I know there's FedRAMP certification. I know for defense contractors, there's the CMMC. So it'll be interesting to see how it gets adopted and actually enforced over the next few months as a way of trying to protect the supply chain there, right? Sorry, Stephen, I didn't mean to jump into your predictions for
No worries. I definitely have to agree with everybody. It's supply chain risk. How do we address it? How do we strengthen those, once again, collaboration with the public and private partnerships to understand what the supply chain risk is? How can we all together work to secure that for anything that's being delivered to the US, regardless of if it is the federal government or not? Because we're all in this game together. Our lives become more cyber connected every day. And then how do we increase the information sharing? So like, I have this piece of data, but it may not mean something without another piece of data that somebody else has over another group, or looking at analytics on how I see this anomaly here, does anybody else see it? Or if these two anomalies are together, how can we better identify, as John was saying, if adversaries are in our networks earlier and do it more smarter? So like, it's just tons of data. How do we whittle it down to what's actually, find that needle in the haystack?
prioritize? Yeah, that's a good point. So any other comments about this topic? Okay. All right. So go ahead, John.
I'll jump back in off of what Stephen was just saying. You know, one of the things that we're trying to do too is, you know, what he's talking about is collaboration and, you know, data sharing. You know, we've gone to a big data platform architecture for our data analytics and our data science across the services, across U.S. Cyber Command, and then all the organizations associated with DoD, as we use these big data platforms, using that type of distributed architecture, and then understanding how using a distributed query. How do you, you know, if the Army sees something in their network, you know, how do we know that the Marines haven't seen that? So, you know, it's how do we query across different data sets to better secure everyone? You know, if the Army sees it, hey, let's see if we query Marines and query the Navy and see if they've seen the same type of thing. Maybe if we do that, we have the ability now to, you know, secure everyone at once instead of duplicative efforts. And I think that's one of the biggest things we're trying to do from here into the future is, you know, reduce duplicity, if I don't know if that's a word or not, but and try and do things, you know, collaboratively.
Yeah. And that sort of plays into the key takeaways, which was going to be my next question. So, you know, clearly we talked about collaboration. We talked about, you know, being able to get quick time to value and being able to get to the point that matters so it can be remediated and systems can be secure as quickly as possible. But what other key takeaways would you each have for the audience? You know, what if you wanted them to make a move and to, you know, to make some suggestions in terms of what they should be thinking about, should be top of mind, what would your suggestions be? Let's start off with Stephen. What do you think?
I think one of the big key takeaways is, I know from my background, really more on the development side, is that we're doing all these agile methodologies, DevSecOps, shifting every security to the left, so we can get the products into the hands of our operators faster. How do we also work with our operators to understand those methodologies so that they can apply that to their information sharing and their analytical capabilities to identify these things faster on the network? The only thing that we can do is go move faster today. And I know, as John and Renee have mentioned, AI, that's probably going to have a big key play, be a big key player in those capabilities.
Okay, so examine AI as a powerful tool for solving their own business problems, whether internally or, you know, public sector or private sector. Great. Okay, Renee, can we go to you next?
Sure. I would say to folks, first and foremost, have a mindset that it makes cybersecurity part of everything that you do when it comes to hardware and software. You can't even buy a refrigerator that doesn't hook to the internet right now. So you should assume anything that walks in your door from a business perspective, you better check under the hood and make sure it's not connecting to your network. And when it does, your mindset is certainly, how can I make the most of my new tool, and how can I use it in the best secure manner that I can? You want to secure it based on the data that's riding through it, right? If it's public information, you just don't want that method to be a way into your network, right? All the way up to classified information. So your mindset needs to be security. I come from NASA, so the mindset really is safety first, and security comes right along next to that one. And then finally, I think you don't do anything alone. This is all about partnership, public-private partnership, CIOs, partnership with the business units, CIO partnership with the cybersecurity teams, cybersecurity teams being in partners with the mission elements so that they can figure out the best way to work stuff. You know, with our flying assets, the satellites, some of them are as old as I am and still flying. I'm not. And with that, you've got operating systems you can't really update. So what can you guys do together as a partnership to secure it as best you can, especially when some of your legacy IT is actually still very, very useful IT and that. And so partnership and mindset, that's what I'll leave with people with.
Great.
Well, okay, here's what I'll say. So I definitely agree with Renee on the partnership and collaboration. That's a big one. I think, you know, stepping back, what I would focus on is cybersecurity is more than just patching. I think one of the biggest things, for whatever reason, across organizations, they see patching as the number one thing. You know, one of the things that, you know, Joint Force Headquarters Doden is doing with collaboration with DISA is they have this thing called SASRE that allows them to rate a risk score to every area across the globe. And when a new vulnerability comes out, they have a way that they rate that, and then they see, how does that one little vulnerability affect every one of those areas of operation across the globe. Understanding that risk to an organization is bigger than just a vulnerability. Risk is, you know, security associated with that organization. How much does that leadership of that organization focus on security of their enclave? How fast are you patching the organization? How fast are you finding vulnerabilities in your network? How fast are you, are you proactively looking for the adversary? Are you applying intelligence to that organization? Across the board, I think my biggest thing, and what I ramble on here about, is cybersecurity is way more than just looking at the patch. How do you secure it? It's so holistic. That's one of the biggest things, and I know my fellow panelists here see it that way, and I know that most of organizations have got that way. but I think we're still pushing the ball up the hill to try and focus on security as a greater thing than just the old style way of, oh, we got a new vulnerability. All right, let's patch it. Let's go. Now we're
Yeah, and to add to that, I think, from our perspective, our key takeaways is you have to start with good quality data, right? To be able to see get that full visibility across your entire platform, whether it's cloud, data center, or you name it, IT, OT, IIoT. So getting that quality data so you have that visibility, which of course, investing in AI absolutely provides that. And then to your point there, John, being able to hone in, to prioritize what matters, because you can't fix 20,000 vulnerabilities, right? And even if you were able to, even if you have the scale to be able to do it, is it absolutely necessary? Could you be redirecting your resources to focusing on just the areas that matter? And then you've made a really good point about patching not being enough. And this is an area that we as a security vendor have also seen. You might have devices that are behind a firewall that, obviously, or devices that that don't need to be remediated. They're already secure. But then you have devices that are offline all the time, or machines that just can't be patched, whether it's because of legacy systems and so on. So being able to have that intelligent remediation capability to see what other options are available, whether it's microsegmenting or any other form of protecting that asset with all your crown jewels, it's going to be really important. So from our perspective, having all three of these elements together, being able to see, being able to prioritize, and being able to have some suggestions that actually mean something for your organization and are more effective, those are the key takeaways in terms of securing systems going forward. So I just wanted to pause for a moment and ask our administrators behind the scene if there are any questions in the chat that our audience would like to direct to the panel, because it's their turn now. So we'll just open up the line or open up the questions there. We'll wait a moment for that to come.
I can fill some space for you there, Janine, if you need to. So,
go ahead, John.
So you just made me think about when you were talking about that. One of the things about legacy systems, this panel we're sitting on right now is hosted by ICIT. So critical infrastructure. Critical infrastructure is key. When you think about legacy systems, one of the big things is obviously our critical infrastructure. Power, water, sewer, all those systems have been around for a long time. And the actual technologies that manage them are very nascent, obviously, and managing them and connecting them to an advanced system like we do on every day, I think actually that's one of the hardest problems we have, and we work that every day in my office specifically. I've got one person that's specifically focused just on critical infrastructure and securing it, and it's it is a killer task because security writ large, when you're talking about legacy systems and connecting them into all the new technologies, newfangled things that we have, that old back system over in the corner there doesn't necessarily connect very well when you're looking at some newfangled technology. So figuring out how to do all that at one time is one of the hardest things when it comes to securing a network. That's just my little filler there for you. So go ahead.
No, I really enjoy you mentioning that, because I know, Renee, we've talked before about the space, right? So at NASA, you have to secure not just what's on the ground, but also what's in space. So every device that has a connectivity, whether it's considered to be an IoT device or other, if it has an IP address, it has to be secured. So I'm always impressed with the thought that at NASA you have to secure on the ground, everything that talks or communicates via an IP address has to be secured, and they can't always be patched, right? So that option of being able to discuss those non-patch remediation techniques has to be very, very critical, especially in that environment.
Absolutely, you need to take a holistic view. For a long time, all the countries that have inhabited space for 50 plus, even longer, right, years, have enjoyed the benefit of space being far away. The environment of space is very, very harsh, but its connectivity was through mission control centers, and the amount of IT around us in 1960s versus in 1970s and 1980s is very different than the IT that surrounds us now. I myself, I'm wearing both an Apple Watch and an Oura Ring, so I'm actually wearing IT on a regular basis, gaining a lot of insights into behaviors I ought to be taking with that. And so space is no different. There are certainly lots of reports and articles in the public domain that talk about how the dangers of space have been increasing with regard to an incident related to the connectivity of IT, which is a cybersecurity incident, and NASA and Air Force and NOAA and all the agencies with flying assets and those that depend upon them, right? Trucking companies, shipping companies depend upon satellites to know where things are and stuff like that. The autonomous vehicles, all of that stuff is starting to really blossom. All that stuff's got to be secured, so design it with security in mind, and then it makes it a lot easier. If you can't, then you have to sit down and you have to take a look at the risks associated with it. And sometimes the risk meter is fairly low. Yes, you have to be willing to sacrifice that asset if you decide that it's low. But if it's not connected to something that's critical, then spend your money wisely, because the spend on cyber can be pretty enormous. So prioritization, risk-based prioritization is the way to go.
Absolutely. And as you were speaking about that, and you talked about things that are mission critical, not to change the topic completely, but when you think of the healthcare world, right? And with COVID, organizations having to spin up, drop in an emergency room in the middle of a conference room or something, anywhere to take care of patients. And of course, those rooms needed to have medical devices, clinical devices put in. And so being able to secure under the types of pressures that security teams have had to face over in 2020, we have to give a lot of kudos absolutely to our security teams and the way they were able to pivot and make those changes over time. So we've seen quite a lot happen.
A good friend of mine is like a regional sales manager for those healthcare devices that you're speaking of. And one of the things him and I got in a conversation about security, and these companies that are building these things, that is like their number one focus right now is how do you secure a heart monitor? How do you secure the ventilator that's connected to that COVID patient there when it's obviously wirelessly sending the information to the nurse's station? Someone breaks into the network of a hospital. It's more than just data collection. They can go in there and just turn off a ventilator. People don't really think about that. That's one of the biggest things right now across the board is, no one ever really thought about that for the longest time. And now, as in the middle of the pandemic, people are like, oh wow, that's probably pretty important. Maybe we should look at how do we secure these devices and how do we focus on security of these devices, at the end. And then also all the way back to where that data is being collected and shared and stored.
And I think to add to that a little bit more, it's as we first touched on the beginning, like with telework and remote work becoming more prevalent, it's what are our new boundaries? So as we learn more of what's connected, where does a network boundary stop? Where does another one begin?
What boundary are you talking about, Steve? That's the question.
There is no boundary anymore, but depending on whose responsibility lies where.
Right. And you also touched on it. John, go ahead.
I was just saying Renee's boundary goes all the way up to Mars right now.
Actually beyond, because the Voyager 2 is
still out there
12 million miles away, right? So I think that's right. We've got a question in the chat. One of them was, is there a model for doing predictive cybersecurity? And I'm not aware of one, but I want to go back to, if you understand what's in your network, two basic questions you need to be able to answer at all times: who and what is on your network? And when you understand those two pieces for your business itself, you have a risk characteristic, you apply that model, and then you find out where your highest risks are, and while you can't predict necessarily where the bad guys are going to go, you can predict and identify what are your highest targets within your enterprise itself, and you can make special attention to it. And likely the bad guys are going to use the easiest thing to get to the hardest thing to get to. And that's so really understanding who and what is on your network, applying a risk-based model can help you then shift to being a lot more predictive and a lot more preventive in your activities. And there's one more question up there with our few minutes remaining.
I'm going to jump on the predictive security, the cybersecurity framework you just talked about, that question, because that's actually one of the things that we've been focusing on pretty hard, is trying to figure out how do you use artificial intelligence and machine learning models to find, to predict where is the next vulnerability going to occur, where is the next, we've actually been working pretty well with Johns Hopkins APL, and they've actually made a very good a technology that actually goes out and literally even using social media, finding in the dark web talking about some type of vulnerability or some type of 0-day that's out there. When is that going to hit? And based off of predictive modeling, we can kind of look at that to say, hey, we expect that this 0-day is going to hit the street and be weaponized in the near future. Let's look at a way, how do we defend against it now before it actually can be weaponized? So that's one of the biggest things we work on a daily basis on.
Yeah, that's really great. And some companies like ours, where our research teams are doing that as well, and updating our threat intelligence feeds on a daily basis. So you can have that level of predictivity, if there's such a word, being able to predict ahead of time, what areas need to be focused on. So I know we only have about 6 more minutes, and Joyce is about to come in a moment. But I think this discussion, we could talk for a long time about this, right? We talked about the gaps that exist, the risk scoring, and the importance of having the right data to be able to come up with the right risks. But one last key point is that risks change every day. So one thing that's really critical is to have that strong security framework, but also continuous monitoring and continuous improvements that can only come from extending and collaborating and getting the right information in to be able to hone in on those areas. So I think, Joyce, we're about to wrap up here. So I just want to say thank you again to the panel. It was a fantastic discussion. And on behalf of Skybox, thank you so much for all these great tips and points here. And again, thanks to ICIT for hosting this.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Appreciate the panel and appreciate Skybox for hosting this event. And we look forward to your participation. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them to us at ICITECH.org, and we will make sure that the panelists get these questions and we can get responses to your answers. We appreciate everything that you're doing in service for our country, and we'll see you at the next ICIT presentation. Have a great day. Live long and prosper.
Thank you.